It was a quiet afternoon on a street that felt heavier than usual. The kind of afternoon where you can hear the faintest sounds, the shuffle of feet, distant car horns, whispers of wind. I watched from across the street, my heart tightening with every word. There he was, a man standing near the corner, alone, not doing anything wrong, just standing, his eyes cast down, hands in his pockets, his clothes worn but clean enough. You could tell he wasn't bothering anyone, but that didn't stop the officer from walking right up to him, with that hard, sharp look in his eyes. The officer sneered, his voice dripping with mockery as he called out, "Hey, you, what's the deal? You homeless or just too lazy to move on?" The man didn't answer. He stayed silent, as if words would only make things worse. But the officer wasn't done. He leaned in, his tone cutting like a knife. "Come on, buddy. You think standing there like some statue's gonna get you sympathy? Pathetic." People nearby slowed down, their eyes flicking between the two. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Others stayed, frozen. No one stepped in. The air was thick with tension. I could feel the man's shoulders tense, but he kept quiet. Maybe he was used to it. Maybe he had no fight left. Or maybe he knew that sometimes silence speaks louder than any scream. The officer laughed, cruel and loud, as if this was some joke only he understood. "Look at you. You're nothing but a sad story. Bet you don't even have a name." The man's face didn't change. Still no answer, just that quiet, calm stillness that made the officer's anger seem even bigger. And then just as the officer was about to deliver another biting remark, his radio suddenly crackled to life. A voice clear, sharp, cut through the mockery. The officer froze. His sneer faltered. Something had just changed, but no one knew it yet. The radio's crackle was sudden, sharp, slicing through the harsh words like a knife through silence. The officer's mocking tone stopped mid-sentence. His lips parted slightly, like he'd heard something he wasn't expecting. Then, clear as day, a name came through the static, a name that made his whole body freeze. "James Morgan, last seen near 5th and Main." The crowd around us shifted uneasily. I could see it in their eyes, the sudden confusion, the curiosity. What was happening? Why had the officer's sneer vanished in an instant? The man on the street didn't move, but his eyes flicked up just for a moment, just long enough to catch mine. There was something in that glance, a flicker of hope, or was it fear? The officer's face changed right before us. The mocking was gone, replaced by a strange mix of shock and disbelief. His eyebrows knitted together, his jaw tightened as if fighting some inner battle. He stared at the man like he'd just seen a ghost. The name on the radio echoed inside him, stirring up something deep and raw. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The street felt smaller somehow, as if everything had stopped around that one word. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the officer reached up, pressing a button on his radio with a shaky hand. He tried to steady his voice, to regain control of the moment, but the shock lingered. "Copy that. Stay alert. We're looking for him." His eyes never left the man's face. I could see it, he was torn. What this name meant was a secret only he knew, and it was about to change everything. He was more than just the quiet figure standing on the street. Behind those tired eyes and worn clothes was a story no one could see at a glance. A story of strength, loss, and silent battles fought every single day. James Morgan wasn't always like this. Once he had a life filled with purpose. He was a soldier, a man who wore his uniform with pride, who believed in serving something bigger than himself. For years he fought far from home, carrying the weight of duty and honor on his shoulders. But life doesn't always follow the path we expect. One day, everything changed. An explosion, a lost friend, a wound that didn't heal, things that left marks deeper than anyone could understand. When James came back, he was different. The war had taken more than his time. It had taken pieces of his soul. The world he returned to wasn't ready for the man he had become. Jobs were scarce, and old friends moved on. His family tried to reach him, but the silence between them grew like a wall. The pain inside him was quiet but heavy, and no one knew how to help. So James found himself on the streets, a place that felt cold and unforgiving. But even there, he held on to something: his dignity. He never asked for much, never caused trouble, just wanted to be left alone. Some days were harder than others. The hunger, the cold nights, the looks that passed him by like he was invisible. But he never lost that quiet strength, the kind that doesn't shout or demand, it just survives. And now, standing there as the officer mocked him, That name on the radio felt like a thread pulling at something deep inside him. James Morgan. His own name, spoken like a secret, like a key waiting to unlock a door. He didn't know what the officer knew, or why hearing that name made the world shift beneath their feet. But for the first time in a long while, something stirred inside him, something that whispered maybe this moment could change everything. Because sometimes the people we pass on the street carry stories that we'll never understand. And sometimes a single name can break through the silence and bring the past rushing back. The officer looked calm on the surface, a man in uniform doing his job. But beneath that badge and the stern face was a storm he carried silently, hidden from the world. His name was Officer Daniels, but few knew the man behind the badge, and even fewer understood the burden he bore every day. Before the uniform, Daniels was just like any other kid from a small town, with dreams and hopes. But life had a way of twisting those dreams. Years ago, before he became a cop, he lived through something that shattered him, something tied to the name now crackling over his radio. It was a night he never forgot, a call that changed everything. James Morgan's name wasn't just a random mention, it was connected to a tragedy Daniels still couldn't fully face. James had been a friend once. More than a friend, really, a brother in arms. They had fought side by side, shared laughs and fears in the darkest moments of war. But the war left wounds that went beyond the battlefield. Daniels remembered the explosion that night, the chaos, the screams. James was caught in it. Daniels had tried to save him, tried to reach him through the smoke and fire, but he couldn't. He failed. That failure haunted him. The guilt burned like a fire he couldn't put out. When he returned home and took the badge, it wasn't just to serve. It was to make up for what he couldn't fix back then, to protect others so no one else would feel that kind of loss. But seeing James now, on the street so broken and silent, stirred up every painful memory. The officer's harsh words, his mockery, they weren't just cruelty, they were a shield, a way to keep the guilt locked inside. Daniel's mind raced every time he looked at the man. Was James angry? Did he hate him? Or worse, did he blame him? The radio crackling that name brought it all rushing back. It was like a ghost from his past had appeared right in front of him, silent but impossible to ignore. He wanted to turn away, to hide the truth behind the tough cop act. But something about James held him there. The man's quiet strength, his dignity even in pain. It was a reminder of what Daniels lost, and what he still hoped to protect. The crowd around them saw only the confrontation, the mocking officer and the silent man. But inside Daniels a battle raged, a fight between the man he wanted to be, and the mistakes he couldn't undo. That night, years ago, left a mark deeper than any wound. And now, standing there facing James Morgan, Daniels was forced to confront the secret he'd kept buried for so long. His initial cruelty was no longer just anger or prejudice. It was fear, the fear of facing the past he'd tried so hard to forget. The fear of seeing a man he once called brother, broken and lost. And maybe, just maybe, the chance to make things right again was right there in front of him. The street was quiet again, but the tension lingered like smoke after a fire. The name James Morgan hung between them, heavy and undeniable. It was more than just a word spoken over a radio. It was a key unlocking a past neither of them could ignore. For years the officer had kept the memory locked away, buried beneath layers of duty and distance. But now, standing face to face with James, the past came rushing back in a flood. James's silence wasn't the quiet of defeat. It was the silence of waiting for someone to see him, to recognize him, to say the words that had never been said before. The connection between them was tangled, complicated by time and pain. James and Daniels had grown up in the same neighborhood, though their paths had diverged early. James was the brave one, always running toward danger, always the first to stand up for others. Daniels was quieter, more cautious, but loyal to a fault. They'd bonded in the military, surviving horrors side by side. But that bond was tested in ways no one could understand, shattered by the night that changed everything. When the explosion took James, Daniels blamed himself. But James didn't die that night. Not really. He survived, but the scars ran deep. When James returned home, things weren't the same. The war had changed him in ways words couldn't capture. He became a shadow of himself, haunted and silent, struggling with the invisible wounds no one saw. That's why he ended up on the street, away from family and friends who didn't understand what he was going through. He carried his pain alone, and Daniels, he became a cop, trying to keep the city safe. But when he saw James standing there, so quiet, so broken, the old feelings, guilt, regret, sorrow, came rushing back. That name on the radio was more than a search alert. It was a reminder of everything Daniels had tried to forget. He looked at James, searching his face for answers. The man's eyes met his briefly, steady and calm, full of a quiet strength. Daniels felt torn. Duty told him to treat James like anyone else, maybe even with suspicion, but his heart told a different story. He remembered the nights spent talking, the laughter shared in the darkest moments. He remembered the promise they made to watch out for each other. Now that promise felt like a fragile thread pulling them back together. For the first time, Daniels saw James not as a man to be mocked or dismissed, but as a brother who had been lost and found again in the strangest way. The crowd around them held their breath, sensing the change in the officer's demeanor. His voice softened when he finally spoke. "James, I never thought I'd see you again." James's lips moved, almost silent, but the weight of those words filled the space between them. "I'm here." It wasn't just an acknowledgement, it was a plea for understanding, for forgiveness, for a chance to heal. Daniels took a step closer, his uniform suddenly feeling heavy with the weight of the moment. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything, for what happened, for not being there." The silence that followed was filled with years of pain and regret, but it was also filled with something new, hope. Daniels knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Duty and emotion pulled him in different directions, but he also knew one thing for certain: he couldn't turn his back on James anymore. The officer made a choice in that moment, to see James as more than a shadow on the street, to treat him with the respect and care he deserved. Because sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought with the heart, and sometimes the names we try to forget are the ones we need the most. The crowd had started to disperse, sensing the moment had shifted from confrontation to something much heavier. Officer Daniels took a slow breath and stepped forward, his usual stern mask softening for the first time. "James," he said again, his voice quieter now. "Can we talk?" James nodded slightly, his eyes steady but guarded. There was a long silence between them, longer than any words could fill. Daniels struggled to find the right thing to say. The words tangled in his throat, memories crashing over him like waves. "I was wrong," he finally admitted, almost a whisper. "That day, back then, I should have done more. I should have saved you." James looked at him, and for the first time his silence cracked. "You didn't save me," he said softly, "but you didn't leave me either." Daniels blinked, surprised. He'd expected anger, blame, even hatred. But not this. There was pain in James's voice. Yes, but also something else. Something Daniels hadn't dared to hope for: forgiveness. "I lost more than you know," James continued. "Not just in the war. At home with my family, with myself." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "Being out here, it's not just about survival, it's about waiting. Waiting for someone to see me, to remember." Daniels felt his chest tighten. He'd seen so many people on the streets, lost souls, broken lives, but none had touched him like this. "I was scared," Daniels confessed. "Scared to face what happened. Scared of how much I failed you." James's eyes didn't waver. "I'm scared too," he said. "Scared that no one will ever understand. That the past will never let us move on." For a moment they just looked at each other. Two men bound by pain, guilt and hope. Daniels lowered his gaze. "Ashamed. I mocked you because I didn't know how else to cope. I thought if I pushed you away, maybe the pain would fade." James's voice was gentle but firm. "Mockery doesn't heal wounds, it just hides them." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. Could this fragile moment become a bridge, or would it crumble under the weight of years? Then James took a breath, almost a whisper. "I don't want to fight anymore. I want to find peace. But I can't do it alone." Daniels nodded slowly. "Neither can I." The officer reached out, hesitating, then offered his hand. Not as a cop to a stranger, but as a man seeking redemption. James looked down at the hand, then back up. Slowly he took it. It wasn't a fix-all. It wasn't the end of their pain or their past, but it was a start, a fragile step toward healing. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was filled with something new, the possibility of understanding. Outside, the world kept moving. But in that small space on the street, two men found a moment that could change everything. The air between them had changed. What started as a harsh confrontation ended with something neither of them expected. A moment of quiet understanding. Officer Daniels looked at James, not as a troublemaker or a shadow on the street, but as a man who had carried too much pain for too long. The mocking tone was gone, replaced by a deep regret that words couldn't fully express. "I'm sorry," Daniels said again, his voice softer this time, "for how I treated you, for not seeing you sooner." James gave a small nod, a flicker of relief in his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness all at once, but it was a start. "I don't know what comes next," James admitted, "but maybe this is the first step. Maybe it's time to stop running from the past." Daniels felt the weight of years lift just a little. For the first time in a long time, he believed that change was possible, not just for James, but for himself too. They stood there, two broken men, bound by a past neither could change, but both could try to heal from. The city around them carried on. No one else might understand what had just happened. But in that moment, on that quiet street, something shifted. James took a slow breath, and looked up at Daniels. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing me." Daniels nodded. "We'll figure this out. Together." It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't a magic fix for years of pain and silence, but it was hope. A fragile, precious hope, that sometimes even the darkest stories can find a light, because behind every name, every face, there's a story waiting to be heard. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen. Sometimes we judge people by what we see on the surface, quick to assume, quick to dismiss. But every person carries a story, a struggle we might never understand. If this story touched you, I hope it reminds you to look deeper, to choose empathy over judgment. If you felt moved, please like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that matter. Don't forget to share this video, because everyone deserves to be seen and heard. Thank you for being here and listening with an open heart.